Before starting to identify how the man. Well, I have to record this. Rafael Antonio Novelo, 1984, Brave New World, Dominating Masses. 1984 and Brave New World are hailed as the most disturbing dystopic novels ever written. Both of them describe societies which have been dominated by political and ideological forces. The notion of free will changed in such writings, as the fictional characters in the novels are constantly being manipulated by government sources. Brave New World was written by Aldous Huxley in 1932, therefore it was published before the release of George Orwell's 1984. There are many parallels and similarities between both works, but Orwell said that his book was not influenced by Brave New World in any form whatsoever. The literary works have got the same main subject, which is the demonstration of what it feels like being controlled by the government all the time, and how this force controls and manipulates the masses without they realizing it. It is necessary to comment the books separately before starting to identify how the masses are being controlled and subjugated by the government. While Huxley is worried about the cultural and biological approach on his book, Orwell is centered on political matters. Seeing things this way, it is easier to describe in what the two dystopic novels differ in. Brave New World, a society biologically and culturally controlled. But I like the inconveniences. Savage. We don't, said the controller. We prefer to do things comfortably. But I don't want comfort. I want God. I want poetry. I want real danger. I want freedom. I want goodness. I want sin. Huxley, 2002, page 163. Aldous Huxley's novel, Brave New World, is an important writing of the English literature. His dystopic viewing in the book is often compared to the book 1984 by George Orwell. Once the two books share a negative view regarding the future of humanity. In this title, we will read about the brainwashed society, unable to feel anything, living in a mass-produced culture in the terms of Henry Ford ideology, the ultimate name in capitalism subject. Huxley is very clear in his novel about how the government managed to undertake the population. The government found in genetics a way to create different human beings to different tasks to be developed in society's life. Now the society is divided into castes, and everyone must develop the activities they were designed and planned for. Everyone works for everyone else. We can't do without anyone. Even epsilons are useful. We couldn't do without epsilons. Everyone works for everyone else. He can't do without anyone. Now the human race is more powerful than nature itself. What man has joined, nature is powerless to put asunder. Those genetically modified human beings were taught how to worship the government and the person who made it all possible, Ford. Huxley's novel, Ford is the new God, and the population must adore everything that he represents: the capitalism, the profit, the production, the large scale, and the technology. In this sense, superior and inferior species of man were created in a lab. The most preoccupying part is that they were aware of their place in society and how they should live in society. Everyone was conditioned while growing up to develop a uniform way of thinking in each created species. This particular way of perceiving the world aimed at the best for the government and how people would contribute to the effectiveness of the colonization of the masses by political forces. This new kind of science is the tool used by the government to control people. As everyone was taught how to think about producing goods and worship the government, they were also taught how to consume to maintain the capitalistic cycle. In this matter, Huxley exposes all his preoccupations as a writer regarding the capitalist system that was so easily noted in 1930 in America and in the so-called American way of life, and even more nowadays. It is interesting to see the writer deepening the approach in his novel regarding the technology advances and how it was being used to control the masses. The fact that people was being created in a lab is a technological advance in itself, but the way it influenced people after they were past the creation process is very preoccupying. The author is explicit in his description of how deep people adore the machines which eliminate the necessity of their thinking. That is the reason why the population does not read anymore, alongside with the censorship by the government and the consumption culture. Back to culture. Yes, actually to culture. You can't consume much if you sit still and read books. Both novels, Brave New World and 1984, are more pertinent now than they were written. Huxley writes about the world where a totalitarian state is responsible for controlling the people through a sophisticated way of mind control, biologically created and brainwashing. Even the social classes were designed in the lab. Every person before the birth would be already conditioned to belong to a previously chosen class and live according to this chosen class, which means that there would not exist such thing as free will. The scariest part is that each individual would not be aware of his or her condition because he or she should be a victim of a previous brainwashing, or he or she would simply not care about the killing of his or her free will. All this brainwashing process will occur during the childhood. When adults, everyone is ready to execute the activities that they were told during the brainwashing process to do so. Por exemplo, escrever uma resenha. In this case, the individuals would use a psychological drug to stop feeling emotions, such as love instead of desire. This point is very clear in Huxley's book when he describes how distorted the sexual encounters were. Everyone belongs to everyone else. Or doubt instead of believing imposed beliefs. We have the character of Bernard Marx illustrating this idea. As you can see in this quotation, there is always someone to calm your anger, to reconcile you to your enemies, to make you patient and long-suffering. In the past, you could only accomplish these things by making a great effort, and after years of hard moral training. Now, you swallow 2 or 3 half-gram tablets, and there you are. A closer look at Huxley's novel will provide to the reader an interesting body of work of intertextuality. The writer is constantly dialoguing with other important writers such as Shakespeare and H.G. Wells. Intertextuality, olha só a viagem, homem do céu. Shakespeare, o cânone literário, e o Wells, o modernismo tecnológico, o despontar da tecnologia. Intertextuality will enrich any writing. Of course it will, if you know how to do it. We can find direct references to Marx. Bernard Marx is the name of the character who is constantly questioning the society, and Freud. Also, we have to pay attention to John, the so-called savage, or the savage, on the novel, to understand the impact of this writing on our postmodern culture. John is the one who quotes Shakespeare and refuses to mix in such controlled society. Huxley's approach is disturbing in this book. He created a society where the government would rule without any kind of threat, aiming at reaching of those 3 elements: community, identity, stability. Once that everyone would be too distracted or too mortified to organize a riot or fight for freedom, the people in Huxley's book do not care about their liberty. Every time they feel uncomfortable with something, all they need to do is to take a pill. The necessity of a revolution would never exist. 1984, society closely watched 24/7, the end of privacy. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Orwell, page 13. The world as we know it does not exist. Let's cut this it. The world as we know does not exist in Orwell's 1984. A great war. We cannot tell if this battle was real or ideological. Destructed it, and a new reality was imposed. Now a totalitarian force would control everything and rewrite history in a way to make possible to control ideologically the population. When this friendly agreement of a steadily imposed relationship between masses and government were infringed, there would be no problem to use violence to correct this mistake. The narrative action takes place in Oceania, a fictional state ruled by the Big Brother. Big Brother is watching you. This totalitarian government made use of the ableness of controlling thoughts to subjugate the population. A way of thinking were imposed, and every information before you went public needed to be strictly simulated in favor of the government. The Ministry of Truth deserves all the credits of manipulating the information. This organ was responsible for controlling all the news media in the entertainment of the population, education, and art. And this goes even more deeper once we know that this ministry controls not only the external world of Oceania, but controls every individual that composes the society, controlling their thoughts, ideas, and beliefs. In the end, the party would announce that 2 and 2 made 5, and you would have to believe it. The ministry was also responsible for the rewriting the history. We do not know how much of the happenings narrated by Winston, the protagonist's novel, really took place in reality. We cannot trust him, not because he is lying, but we are aware of the fact that everything he knows consists of manipulated information and false facts. Everything that is unpleasant to the Big Brother, the ministry immediately erased the information, creating a fake history. That is why in 1984 the world is a place without culture, since we know that there is no culture without a past. Culture and the past are intrinsical elements that cannot be separated from one another. We have something similar to this in Brave New World. Once it is explicit that the characters do not read any kind of books and do not manifest a developed culture. This process of continuous alteration was applied not only to newspapers, but to books, periodicals, pamphlets, posters, leaflets, films, soundtracks, cartoons, photographs, to every kind of literature or documentation which might conceivably hold any political or ideological significance. All that the party, the totalitarian regime ruled by the Big Brother, looks for is the power. They are the rulers, and they do everything to keep it that way, all for the power's sake. But the main purpose of the party is to avoid a get-together of the population, which means a mass organization urging for a change and for the fall of the rulers. Power is not a means, it is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard the revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. The object of persecution is persecution. The object of torture is torture. The object of power is power. We need to pay attention to an important element of Orwell's book, the way that the government succeeded in dominating the society using the language. Orwell said, "It is actually politics in the English language that if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought." And the author was explicit about this in his literary text 1984. The government created a new vocabulary, simplifying it, excluding words, just to restrict the language of the citizens, and as a consequence, reducing the world's view, their world's view. Once we do not have the words to express thoughts, what is on our minds ceases to exist. The purpose of Newspeak was not only to provide a medium of expression for the worldview and mental habits proper to the devotees of Ingsoc, but to make all other modes of thought impossible. Nice. Brave New World in 1984, a parallel. Both literary works illustrate a society that is completely subjugated by a totalitarian government, responsible for controlling every citizen of each society. The narrative space in the books is the dystopic city where nothing happens without the knowing of the tyrants. The city is described as a horrific place that helps on the brainwashing and controlling process idealized by the highest powers. Orwell and Huxley envisioned that the lower classes would be dominated by an elite. This elite would have the power over everything, making the lower classes work and think for the sake of an ideology that would only interest who is actually on command. The lower classes would contribute to their own oppression process. This elite is described as dictatorial and controlling in both books. Also, these lower classes were diminished intellectually in both books. An ignorant society is easier to control than an informed and preoccupied one. The difference is that in Huxley's novel, the lower classes would be designed biologically to obey the imposed rules, and Orwell is more objective and introduces to the reader a world where the population is minimized by the use of violence and ideologically imposed ideas in his imaginary Oceania. This elite is represented by the Big Brother in 1984. In Huxley's case, Mustafa Mond is the responsible one to dominate the lower classes. While the Big Brother is feared in 1984, Mustafa Mond is loved and worshipped by the ones he oppresses. Here we have another essential divergent idea if we compare the two books. Huxley emphasizes that the population adores its oppressor. Hence, the necessity of taking him down would never exist. On the other hand, in 1984, the fear of the oppressor is so overwhelming that the population would always be defenseless and living in fear. The culture is an important element in the novels. Everything that is produced artistically in the narratives, if we can use the word artistically here, is closely watched by the government. The result of this production is propaganda in favor of the tyrant. In Brave New World, we have the example of the Phillies, which is a kind of a movie that functions as a defense of the tyrant, being made very simply to not make the audience think about what was just watched. The population should not develop their thinking skills for the sake of the government's stability. Also, those productions aimed at reducing the viewer's intelligence and did not bring quality to the entertainment of the masses. Our world is not the same as Othello's world. You can't make flavors without steel, and you can't make tragedies without social instability. The world's stable now. People are happy. They get what they want, and they never want what they can get. And if anything should go wrong, there's some But you go and check out in the window in the name of liberty, Mr. Savage. Liberty, expecting deltas to know what liberty is, and now expecting them to understand Othello. My good boy, oh, of course Othello is better than those Phillies. But that's the price we have to pay for stability. You've got to choose between happiness and what people used to call high art. 1984, it is even more explicit. Every TV program would bring the face of the Big Brother. Those programs were cheap productions used to glorify the Big Brother. Everything would be manipulated in favor of the tyrants and the oppressing government. Another aspect that we should look at is the fact of how important it is to forget about the past for the complete installment of the totalitarian regime. Knowing history is fundamental to understand why the world is the way it is. If we look at the previous mistakes committed by human beings on the course of humanity's history, such as the great wars and totalitarian regimes, we might avoid that such happenings occur again in the future or other possible misleadings. As Huxley pointed out in Brave New World, "You all remember," said the controller in his strong, deep voice, "you all remember, I suppose, that beautiful and inspired saying of our forwards, history is bunk. History," he repeated slowly, "is bunk." In Orwell's 1984, the past was dead. The future was unimaginable. Who controls the past, ran the party slogan, controls the future. Who controls the present, controls the past. It was already said that the two novels are similar in so many levels, but if we stop to pay attention to the narrative style, we will not find any kind of similarity. 1984 is about the character, Winston Smith, and only his impressions are pertinent to the narrative. Also, 1984 is a way more politic novel and more expositive because its plot is more complex. The reader must understand the world and its new division and the way the new language works. Orwell uses a chapter only to explain these details and deviates only this one time from his central character. If the author has not written this explanatory chapter, the novel would be useless once the reader would not understand a thing. On the other hand, Huxley's novel is centered in multiple perspectives. Nina, Bernard, John, the director, in a way that his book has not only the central character and more centered on actual actions. Of course, Brave New World has its didactic moments, but the book is much more adventurous than Orwell's one. The main difference regarding these dystopic novels resides in the fact that in 1984 we should fear the ones who were holding the power and controlling all the information. Huxley's book has a different approach, since that the government gives so much distraction to the population that there would not exist the necessity of feeling freedom in any way. The population is happy with the way the world is. In Brave New World, the main words are passivity and stability. We don't want to change. Every change is a menace to stability. And in 1984, we have another world, oppression. World or word? Word. Until they become conscious, they will never rebel. And until after they have rebelled, they cannot become conscious. Power is in tearing human minds to pieces and putting them together again in new shapes of your own choosing. Both books are seen as prophecies by their authors for today readers because we can find so many similarities comparing our reality to the books. A closer reading will proportionate that the authors are trying to warn the readers. If the world continues to move forward at this pace, we might find ourselves on the skin of Winston or Bernard, the savage, or even living in a hybrid world mixing the dystopias of Orwell and Huxley. The author Huxley once said, "Most men and women will grow up to love their servitude and will never dream of revolution." We can only hope, even though we prove himself right so many times in his novel, that this time is wrong. Very nice, very nice. Congratulations.